Well, right on time. The music stopped. That's very good. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mattia Romani. I'm Managing Director for Economics, Policy and Governance at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Thank you very much for joining this particular panel, which will be the best panel you've attended at the Astana Economic Forum for sure, because we have an incredible lineup of speakers. If you're interested in connectivity and growth, which I suspect you will be, given it's a theme of this particular panel, you will be very happy to see who we have lined up for you. Why are we keen on this? We are keen on this because we know how important connectivity and integration is, because it drives growth and it drives welfare for firms and for people. At the EBRD, in fact, integration of the economies is one of the fundamental goals of the bank, and that's what we invest on a lot. But it's particularly important in Kazakhstan because, as we know, Kazakhstan is in the middle of the Silk Road. But if you start looking at integration and connectivity, you discover some very, very dark secrets. And the dark secrets are that this region is not connected to the global economy. This region is not part of global value chains. This region is not part of international IT networks. This is the reality. If you look at rankings, this becomes very, very clear. Kazakhstan ranks 71 out of 160 in the World Bank Logistics Performance Index. In terms of its global value chain integration that measures the extent to which the GDP of the country is dependent on global value chains, Kazakhstan is half the performance of a country like Hungary, for example, of course much lower than countries in Western Europe would be. And then what you also discover is that if you do a little bit of modeling and you look at how the economy of a country like Kazakhstan could benefit by being more integrated, the numbers are shocking. You could increase GDP by 1% a year simply by taking Kazakhstan to the same level of connectivity of Hungary. So the potential, 1% a year is a lot, by the way. If you're an economist, you know that. 1% sounds small, but 1% growth every year is a significant, significant change. So we want this region better integrated, and we want to understand what the problems are and what can we do about it. And that's why we've asked this incredible lineup of people to come and tell us just that. So we have Thomas Lamnidis. I'm sorry for mispronounce your name. Lamnidis. Greek, yes? Indeed. Thomas has 30 plus years of experience in the legal sector. He's a lawyer. He has set up a legal firm, Savvy Business, that specializes in transport and commercial law, if I understand correctly, and energy. So he'll be able to tell us about legal obstacles to integration. I think that's really an important element. Then we have Alexei Grom. He's the president and chairman of the board of United Transport and Logistics Company, Eurasian Rail Alliance. He'll be great because he'll tell us everything about rail. So that's really the scope. I particularly like Alexei because his surname, Grom, is the same surname as a very good ice cream, gelato firm in Italy. You're not related, are you? No.
But it's Russian, it means thunder.
Thunder?
Thunder.
Okay, yeah. Oh, well, there you go. Eugene Xie, if I pronounce your name properly. Eugene is the CEO of Port of Baku. He also has 30 years of experience in running ports. So he's going to tell us a lot about logistics of ports, which I'm really curious about. And Massimo, as always, Massimo De Andreis, is the general manager of SRM, which is an economic research center dedicated to the maritime economy of the Mediterranean, part of the San Paolo group. We're very, very excited to have him because Massimo has really a lot of experience about what happened in the Mediterranean over the last 10, 15 years in the maritime economy. And last but not least, we have Yerlan Absatov is the General Director of the Transport Union of Kazakhstan, Kazlogistics. Yerlan is an expert about road transport, so it's going to be roads. So we have ports, we have rails, we have roads, we have legal frameworks. So we cover pretty much everything that we need to know to figure out both what the problems are and what the solutions would look like. So let me start with Thomas. Let's start from the legal framework side of things. So the question is really about judicial frameworks and how they play a role in connectivity. Why do they matter in your experience? And Thomas, if you have slides, I don't know if you have, but anybody that has slides, let me know. I have a clicker and your slides can be put up, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mattia. I'd like to thank also the organizers of the event that invited us here to participate in this discussion panel. So, there are some important things that has been done in the past in the broader region as far as it concerns the institutional framework for transporting goods from Central Asia to Europe. It was the famous Traseka project, Transport Corridor Europe-Caucasus area, Asia, that created also a basic institutional framework that facilitated at a certain level cross-border procedures and also trade facilitation. But this project never included China. China was outside. So when it started the initiative for One Silk, One Road, One Belt, One Road, things changed because there were existed quantities. Before, we have just to solve issues of some landlocked countries and nothing very important. No big quantities, not a lot of containers. And then China entered into the game. But China and Europe, so the basic producers and consumers, they forgot the middle. A lot of times, they forgot that it existed, this Central Asia. They forgot that it existed Kazakhstan. I was a few months before in the China-Europe summit in Hamburg, and I was trying to see between participants Kazakhs, or Azeri, or Georgians. Nobody was there. So I was wondering, as I was panelist, I understand we are speaking one belt, one roads. Where is the middle of the chain? It's not existing. And there are the problems. In these countries, in Central Asia, are the institutional problems. Here we need to work on trade facilitation issues, on cross-border procedure, on connectivity via technology. Here is a missing link. So even if we have huge production and huge consumption from both sides, unless you have the missing link, you have nothing. You have the sea. Okay, let's not discuss about one belt, one road then. We can discuss for maritime road, that's all. So, but what do we have to do? How to approach it? Harmonizing legislation between countries is a huge task, at the limit of the impossible. It takes ages. European Union still making changes in legislation after so many years. In order to do what? In reality, to facilitate all this exchanging of civilization, workers, people, businesses, and make same environment. What we have to do here in Kazakhstan, we had the chance to have the best benchmark ever in the world. What is that? Pipelines. Why I say that? In order to make a pipeline between two countries, it's a heavy work. If we want to include more, that's much heavier. To give you an example, in order to make an agreement between Brasilia and Bolivia, it took only 25 years of negotiation for two countries. But what Kazakhstan did, Kazakhstan succeeded in few years to make pipelines connecting via Russia, the CPC pipeline, connecting Tengiz and upper western Kazakhstan with international sea. He succeeded to bring via Caspia Sea and Baku, oil and some oil products as well, via Baku Tbilisi Ceyhan, or via multimodal transportation system from Baku, Tbilisi, Batumi. They succeeded to bring a lot of quantities. And then they succeeded what else? To make also an agreement in very short period of time with China and create the Kazakh-Chinese pipeline. This is the benchmark, the best ever. What succeeded this unbelievable first president of the country, he succeeded to have under the umbrella protection of Americans in the upstream, of Chinese upstream and downstream, Russians upstream and downstream, to be under the protection of the three biggest players and not only players of this world. So he created a house of peace. How? Just using simple things, just making agreements with his pipelines. The same we have to bring also when discussing transportation systems, multimodal or just rail or whatever. If we try to change the legislation, we are in a wrong path. If we try to isolate the project as one entity, and for this concrete project to put the rules using technological methods of 5G, blockchain in order to have transparent transportation and everything clean and secured. If you do this in a very short period of time, you are at the position to have clear environmental and institutional framework for each and every transportation system of the One Belt, One Road initiative. I would like to add only one thing. Please do not forget, in this country we are in the hottest area of this world, just few kilometers north from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. And what we have here, we have the home of peace because of Nursultan Nazarbayev. In Academy Awards, they are giving every year one Oscar to someone who is offering for his life something to the cinema. President Nazarbayev offered his life to create peace and stability in this country, in this region, and also in this country, tolerance for religion. By creating prosperity with all he has done up to now, what we have seen in reality, we have seen the fertilizer of terrorism, which is so close, and which is the lack of prosperity, to disappear. It disappeared from this country. It's extremely important, and I wish to see President Nazarbayev to be awarded for his life efforts for peace and religion tolerance the Nobel Prize of Peace. This I wanted to say.
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks for putting this question in such a wide perspective. Whomever says that lawyers are boring clearly has never met you, because the last thing you can say about your vision is that it's a boring vision. Alexei, let me then turn to you if I can. So, great vision of why it matters, what needs to be done, why it's so important for global stability. Now, can railways help on this? Where do you see railways going in this region for the next 10, 15, 20 years?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mattia. Of course, it's quite difficult to be the second after such an emotional speaker, but I will try to do my best. And thank you very much for having me here and for your question. I also have the presentation, but I love your idea to proceed in interactive way. So, how we see our transport industry or rail industry in next 10 or 20 years? Actually, this question I ask myself every morning, like most of the people in this room, I guess. And Same, I have asked myself 10, 20, even 30 years ago, when I was graduated from the Transport University in Moscow, and if someone would have told me then that in 2019 the truck will be competing with rail at the distances exceeding 2,000 kilometers, or in the same time the rail in pricing will be competitive to the deep sea routes in the Eurasian traffic, I would probably not believe to that. But this is today's industry reality. And I think that connectivity is one of the major factors which will help us and the railway industry as well to be competitive in service and in pricing in the next 10 or 20 years. And from my point of view, the era of M&A will be replaced by era of connectivity and partnership, alliances. Transport industry has a very big responsibility for many things in this world, because transport industry is known as how to bring industry together, how to create these alliances in the air, in the sea, and UTLC era is a very good example of how the railway infrastructures can be united just to get the global target to have a safe, fast, and reliable bridge in Eurasian trade flows. And my forecast for 10 years ahead, for 20 years ahead, contains only good news for customers and cargo holders. And I think that, I'm sure that the capacity will grow up, the prices will drop down, and most of the cargo will be transported in the containers. It's going to happen not in the next 10 years, I think in 5 years. We see that on our UTLC era example, we have started with single shipments from China to Europe 3 or 4 years ago from single trains. And last year, UTLC era had up to 15 trains a day. And all these trains, they went through the Kazakhstan area, and from my point of view, this is one of the most demanded corridor. And as Thomas said, where is this middle, where is this pipeline? UTLC era, together with its shareholders, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Belarus, is this pipeline. And we are this gold middle, and you are very welcome to join us and to have all the benefits of our connectivity. A couple of weeks ago, when I was in Europe, one of the CEO of one European railway company, he asked me to sign an agreement. I said, we are very open. And he said, well, you know, we are not going to be the main in this supply chain, but we want to have this part of transportation by road. And I stopped him and I asked, and who do you think is the main? And it was no answer for that. And I think one of the most competitive advantage of our common project between Kazakhstan, Russia, and Belarus, that we're not looking for who is the main. We are uniting, and we are taking benefits of our common treasure, of our 1520 rail infrastructure, which we got from our fathers and grandfathers. And our responsibility is to live efficient, reliable, safe, fast, and develop infrastructure for the next generations. So this, if I have answered your question. Thank you.
You have, and you're emotional about railways too, which is quite impressive. I've never seen anybody get emotional about railways. That's very impressive. I will have a couple of questions for you, but I want to hear from everybody before.
Sure.
And I'm sure you may even use some of your slides. Eugene, can we move to ports? Eugene, you're CEO of Port of Baku. What's happening to ports in the world, particularly when they are in the middle of the Belt and Road initiative? Where do you see the future of your business going? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities?
Actually, when you talk about Belt and Road, you have to realize that there are many corridors. So when you talk about ports per se, you are actually talking about ports in the Caspian Sea. Right? Baku is one of them. Sorry, Yeah, Baku in Azerbaijan is one port. There's Aktau, Kurik, and there's Turkmenbashi. And if you look at the map, okay, if you look at the map, the map will come on later. Okay, you look at the map, okay, first of all, connectivity is just meaning more than hard infrastructure. You connectivity in every sense of the word. You are talking about connecting with the systems, you're connecting with the people, you're talking about ports, you're connecting with the port hinterland. And to do that, there are many things to take care of, which was already brought up. Registrations, you need to talk about rules, you need to talk about custom procedures, and that's actually the hard part, which I think in the second part we have to go a bit in detail. And looking about, this is just a picture of the port of Baku in Agat, looking about where we are. If you look at the central corridor in the Caspian Sea, there's Baku there, Baku International Sea Trade Port in Agat, and you can see if you use the central corridor, you need to cross the Caspian Sea. So port, in a sense, has to be efficient in handling this intermodal transfer. If you talk about distances-wise between the central, the northern, and southern corridor, you're talking about 2,000, 1,500 kilometers, right? But when you're talking about transfers, sometimes it can be delayed, even by 1 day, 2 days, where the ships come in and nothing moves. And why nothing moves? Because there's no connectivity. Connectivity in what sense? Connectivity with systems, right? When I'm in Singapore, right, I came from Singapore. I've worked in Baku for 4 years already. When you're in Singapore, when ships go across ASEAN, Asian countries, when transshipment cargo is thing, you're talking about 10,000 containers being loaded from a single vessel, right? But you don't see things that happen in the background, such as custom procedures. We don't see checks on crew and all that. All these things, the system takes over, and when the ship comes in, you just see the spreader takes the box and it goes onto the trucks, and off it goes. Here, there's a bit of difficulty in accepting that. People sometimes feel that they need something of substance in their hand, hard paper, to go and check, physically check. You know, they need to check it, right? But then when the question comes in, can we use other things to help us check? Implementation of information technology systems to highlight key risk areas so that the checks only are required when something flags out, so that the operations can be seamless when the vessel comes alongside. And when I first started work in this region, I sort of was taken back a bit, okay, because I see, how come the vessel is not working? Why is it not? What are they doing? Why are they staying here half a day? All this adds time. Time to the customer is cost. But over a period of time, people come to accept all these hidden costs. But why should they? If you talk about the belt and route connectivity, then you should accept to realize the full potential. And to realize the full potential, I think that's one reason why we are here today, is to enhance the capabilities of systems, to implement the right technologies for us to transfer information to appropriate parties so that when the time comes, your operations can take place without a hitch, right? And that's where earlier participants also mentioned about the legal framework. All these things takes time. So right now, countries are working together, I feel. Coming here for 4 years already, I can feel things are moving in the right direction. Kazakhstan is taking the lead in many areas. Azerbaijan too. There's some bilateral framework working on custom procedures, which is very good, right? So that we can see more seamless operations happening on the ground, right? And then there's also the part about rails, right? If you talk about the span of rails coming from China across all the way to Europe, right? Many things can happen along the way. So what we need to do to make this seamless, for all the customer to trust the railroad system, they want to be able to have track and trace capability, right? To have confidence. So that's when your information technology comes in, your application of Internet of Things, your GPS systems and all that. But to do this, right, you need to attract players. And to attract players, you need to have good framework for the people to come in to work, right? In Azerbaijan, having a port alone is not our intention. We want to connect with the markets. That's the second part of connectivity. And to do that, we envisage having a free trade zone. So we have done a very detailed study, taking the best practices from Jebel Ali, Dubai, looking at it, looking at the frameworks, right? And then we told ourselves, let's look at it, take the best practices, right? All this, so that we can attract players into this free trade zone. Basically, it's a system within the system, right? Because if you want to change the whole country system, it will take a lot of time. And to jumpstart this, you say, okay, let's have a free trade zone modeled on the best practices. Okay, what are the best practices? Okay, one-stop shop, for example. You come in, anything value-added component, there's no custom excise taxes on it. It makes your products more competitive in the region. What else? Visas, easy application of visas. I was in Belarus a couple of weeks ago where the Chinese was there doing the Great Stone Park, which is a giant free trade zone the size of Singapore, I think, in its full potential. And you have a one-stop shop. You apply for visa, you get it within the same day. Fantastic. So all these things, when they come into play, right, then you can connect with the markets, and you bring in players, right, you bring the goods and services, and the port, in its role, will have to be connected to this free trade zone. And once it's been connected to this free trade zone, it facilitates the fast transfer of goods to the regional markets. If you talk about markets in this region, what are we talking about? The hinterland. Just fast track, you're talking about these markets. Expand and visualize the markets at hand. It's now become, when you talk about Central Asia, yes, there are many points that we are saying disconnected. So our job, our goal, is to integrate these markets into a regional market between China and Europe. And in this sense, we create to ourselves trade, which will create economic growth for the countries. Can I stop here for a while?
You can. You'll have a chance to keep telling us about this. But let's then move to another side of the port story, which is the Med. And Massimo, can you tell us what happened in the Med in the last 10 years? How have things changed, and what lessons can we draw from the experience in the Mediterranean that are relevant for this bit of the world? Eugene, can you pass the clicker to Massimo?
Sorry. Thank you.
Please, thank you.
So first of all, thank you very much, Mattia, and thank you very much to the organizer and Reinventing Bretton Woods for inviting me, and of course the Astana Economic Forum. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. So the Mediterranean, as Mattia said, we are experiencing what we call a sort of new centrality of the Mediterranean, thanks to Belt and Road Initiative and thanks to the new Suez Canal. But before making the comparison between the Mediterranean and this area of the world, I think we should look a little bit, exactly. Okay, perfect. Where we are. We are in the middle of, in the middle of the most important GDP area in the world. If we look from the geo-economic and geopolitical perspective, this part of the world today is in the middle of the 60% of the GDP, which is produced between Europe and Asia. But the fact of being, and plus, as you can see, 1.5 trillion in annual trade, but the fact of being in the middle of one of the most important GDP areas of the world doesn't mean, as Mattia said, to be in the middle of the connectivity, to have high ranking in connectivity. Europe has a high ranking in connectivity. As you can see, according to the Logistics Performance Index, Germany, Belgium, Sweden, Austria, even Italy are between the top 20 in the most connected and efficient system of ports, logistics. Then Asia is following, far but not so far. Japan is number 5. As you can see, China is following, but it's not the 71 position of Kazakhstan and the other countries. But if we do not look at the ranking, but if we look at the improvement year by year, we see that this part of the world is improving in a very impressive way. So I think it's a question of time. And here we come with the comparison with what is happening in the Mediterranean. What is happening in the Mediterranean is that we have an infrastructure news, quite news. I mean, it was 2016, so 2 years and a half ago. The new Suez Canal, which means reduction in times, no limits in ship size dimension to pass through, logistics facilities, and so on. I don't want to elaborate, but I can if you want. Then the growing role of China, Belt and Road Initiative. I think all the forum is talking about Belt and Road Initiative, so I don't have nothing to add. But I have to add something on the third point, which is quite important according to our vision. The evolution in shipping industry. Many people think that the Belt and Road Initiative success is only because China is pushing, because it's a strategy from China, from the government, and this is true. But what is also true is that Belt and Road Initiative is succeeding because there is an evolution in shipping industry, the push on growing sites in terms of ship dimension and merger between carriers. And this involves the need to generate economies of scale. When you have a 22,000 TEUs container ship, you need to generate economies of scale, otherwise it's not convenient. And the point is that the Belt and Road, maritime Belt and Road through Suez, because you have multiple stops where you can load and download, helps in shipping industry to generate economies of scale, because you have the full capacity all over. You can reach, the full capacity as an average, all over the route, and not only because you are leaving full a port and to download the full capacity to the final port of destination. So the fact that you have multiple stops, which is not the case of the Pacific Ocean, when if you leave Shanghai to New York, you have 22 days of solitary navigation, then you pass the Panama Canal, and more or less you reach the final destination in North America or in South America. So this is a very, very important point, and this is also the reason why China is investing so much in the Mediterranean, and is so important, the Mediterranean, for China. Look, and here we come at the parallel with what is happening in this part of the world. Look, the Mediterranean is in the middle of 20,000 billions of GDP. If we put together the GDP of Europe and the GDP of the MENA countries, we have little less than 20,000 billion. So the double of the GDP of China, more than the GDP of United States. So it's very clear that for reaching Mediterranean is a small lake if we compare with the oceans. And we are talking of a small lake that right now has the 20% of all the maritime transportation in the world. It was 12% in 1995. And you can see all the investment made by the Chinese from Abu Dhabi to the general headquarters in Hamburg of Costco. And you can also have, from the Chinese point of view, the option to reach the west coast of the United States. So a lot of options in order to generate the kind of economies of scale I said. Here we come, and I close, to the point of what is happening in the Mediterranean. So more efficient ports. Ports are gaining competitiveness, are gaining in terms of the ranking, and there are new investments which are coming. And an example, and I close here for this first round, from the private point of view perspective, I work for Intesa Sanpaolo Bank. As you said, my research center is belonging to the Intesa Sanpaolo Bank, which is the leading Italian bank and one among the top 5 European banks. We allocated 1.5 billion for logistics and investment, only to support investment from foreign investors to special logistics zone and ports in Italy. Why? Because we know that there is a lot of new investments which are coming, because competitiveness is improving. You can see this is the ranking of the Italian ports. They are all improving competitiveness in terms of logistics performance index. And again, I close here, the comparison with Kazakhstan. Of course, the ranking is different, but you can see the arrows, green means improvement. So I think that in a certain way, what we are experiencing in the Mediterranean, thanks to China Belt and Road, to the new Suez Canal, the sort of a lot of growing regional network, which is also important, it was the base for an improvement in terms of connectivity and in terms of attraction of investment. And it is, I suppose, what will happen, it's starting to be, will happen more in the future in this part of the world.
Well, Massimo, thank you very much for telling us about such a striking trend that is happening to ports in the Mediterranean and probably in other bits of the world as well, from what we understand, also from Eugene. This issue of the logistics that is required to generate those economies of scale became very clear to me. I was lucky enough a few weeks ago to be on the Suez Canal, because we at TBRD are investing in the economic zone in the vicinity of the canal. And I could see from the little boat we were on about 20 ships down the canal, and each ship was this enormous container ship. And it's so striking, the amount of coordination logistics to put the goods on that ship. They must come from thousands and thousands of different factories, and we'll have to go to thousands and thousands of different consumers around the world, all on that ship in that moment crossing the canal. It really becomes striking to realize the logistics behind that. Right, so we've been told so far that the future of railway is amazing, and costs are going down, investments are going up. Railways are the future. We've also been told that ports are increasing in efficiencies and are becoming really the hub of complexity of logistics. Now, what is left for road transport? Yerlan, you'll have to defend road transport and tell us what is the future of road transport and whether it is still a relevant mean of transportation for goods around the world.
Большое спасибо. Добрый день всем.
Thank you very much. Hello to everyone. Of course, there is a place for road transport and transport logistics in Kazakhstan, and the capacity of Kazakhstan is very high. And Kazakhstan has improved its position, and it's rated 71, 6 positions better than previous time. And you know that we have the plan of becoming one of the 30th most developed countries in the world. That's for our region. In Kazakhstan, there are 11 routes, 6 automobile corridors, and 5 railway corridors. We've established a United Transport Logistics Company. We've also created the Association for the Development of the Caspian region. We have a lot of capacity. We observe development in Kazakhstan, and I think that Kazakhstan will become stronger from the point of view of transports and logistics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yerlan, and we want to learn more in a minute about how that is happening in Kazakhstan. But I want also to give a chance to the audience to come in, because I'm sure that we have many people in the audience that have deep expertise on this region. Before I do that, and while you prepare your questions, I had just 2 questions. One is for Alexei. Alexei, can you share with us what is the latest data on the competitiveness of the railway transport between China and Europe, say, and the sea routes? I suspect you may have some slides on that, because that's the kind of numbers. Because those numbers are very important, and you tell us the costs are coming down, but it'd be nice to see the extent to which this is happening today. I'm sure if somebody can put back up Alexei's slides.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mattia, for the question. You read my minds. I want to come back again to my university time. When I was studying there, it was a fundamental knowledge that rail will always be at least 4 times more expensive than ship. But as I said already in my first word, in my first speech, the situation has been changed drastically. Of course, to have more sales, you must be more competitive in service and in pricing as well. Service, this is first of all speed. I don't remember if I mentioned that, but today we have a record speed in terms of the Eurasian railway transit, and from the border, Chinese-Kazakhstan border, we're getting to the European border in less than 5.5 days. So that means that our average speed today is already more than 1,000 kilometers a day, what I think should be very attractive for the customers. In terms of the tariffs, since 2015, we have dropped the price for 30% for our customers. And, but to be more transparent and more open for the market, we have designed the first railway index, which we called ERAI, Eurasian Rail Alliance Index, and I want to show you how it works. We have established a separate website, and you can enter it right now on www.index1520.com, and you will see in the online regime the current rate for our basic corridor going through Kazakhstan, Russia, and Belarus. So you don't really need to call to UTLC ERA office to check what is the rate. You can go to this site and you will find also not only the tariff information, but many other important information about railway traffic. But that what I can stress today, that the difference sometimes between the sea freight and the rail freight is less than $1,000 for the container, for the 40-feet container. So if you compare not only direct costs, but also indirect costs, like for example, for working capital, you will see that this difference convinces customers to look more to the railway corridor. And this is a very, very new index. We tried to promote this index as the shipping light are promoting the well-known shipping indexes like Shanghai Containerized Freight Index or World Containerized Index from some consulting agencies. So we are not so drastically, in terms of tariffs, we are not so different even with the deep sea routes. So my expectations for the next 5 or 10 years, this gap will be lower and we will be more attractive in terms of pricing as well. You are very welcome to go and see our new tool, and we will be very grateful to you if you give us any feedback for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexei. Anybody else? Massimo, maybe you want to say something about the cost and the comparison?
No, I have a question for Alexei, if I may. I'm interested in having your opinion because the narrative of someone is that there is a sort of competitiveness between the maritime Silk Road and the rail Silk Road. In my view, this is not true. There is and there will be more in the future a sort of complementarity. But this is my view. I want to know if you share my view or not.
Yes, Massimo, you're absolutely right. And this is also a fundamental thing, that railway, in terms of the Eurasian traffic, will be always a complementary to the deep sea. Of course, railway is not designed for the trains with 20,000 TEUs. Railway is designed for someone who wants to focus more on the transit time. And if we have 5, 7, 10% of the total volume of Eurasian traffic, I think it's going to be a very good result for all the railway companies, all the countries along this new railway, not just railway silkway. In Russia, we're saying that life is developing where the rail is developing. I think you can say about the same for Kazakhstan, for sure, and for all the countries along this way. It gives so many points for other industries, for construction, metal, IT, many, many industries. Our people are living better when the rail volume are increasing, especially in transit. But still, answering your question, yes, I think railway will always stay a complementary. 1 million or let's say 2 million of containers out of 23 million of containers between Southeast Asia and China and Europe, this is 5%. But it means for railway, the train every 45 minutes, every 30 minutes. Isn't it great to have the frequency of the freight trains, like for the very busy passenger shuttle? I think it's great. I think it's a very, very ambitious target for all the railway infrastructures along this way.
Well, thank you very much. Can I ask the audience to come in for a moment, Eugene, because I don't want to hold them back, but I know that you want to make a point. By the way, this point was very important, and they tell me that to make a panel interactive and interesting, you have to get a good fight. That didn't work between Massimo and you. Now you're best friends again, so it's a pity. Anyway, questions for the audience. I have a gentleman there, so if I can have a microphone, and then I have a lady right in the middle and a lady there. 3 questions. So first, this gentleman down here. Thank you very much. Microphone is coming. If you could introduce yourself and keep the question to 20 seconds maximum, I'm counting.
Okay, Thomas Sefcik, Artesia, out of Zurich in LA. Great so far. One question regarding the Arctic. Is Arctic the big elephant in the room, or would you, because you're all going to be infected, more or less, deny it? And why deny it? Especially, is Arctic the new Med?
Great question.
Most of the population industrial might in Europe is north of the Alps. We as Swiss built our stuff and our infrastructure. The Italians and the Germans didn't. So it's difficult to move the stuff up from Med to the real European heartland. Arctic could probably open up. And question next also, is Arctic probably also even challenging some of the railway business models in Russia or in Central Asia?
Brilliant question. Thank you very much. So I have the lady right there in the middle. If a microphone could reach her. Well, this one first, and then there's a lady behind you after that. Yes, ma'am.
На русском вопрос. So my question will be in Russian. My question to Alexei Grom. Really, Kazakhstan is the biggest country in the world which is landlocked. That's why for this country, issues of transit, of transportation are very viable and very significant issues, not to support trade, but to ensure the internal connectivity of the whole region. And our ancestors, at the beginning of 2000, initiated the big transportation corridor, Western Europe, Central Asia, and Western China. And automobile corridor reached the borders of Russia, and there it stumbled. Mr. Putin turned to the government to accelerate continuation of creation of it. But my question is, what are the perspectives of that? And the second question is, speaking of railway transport, as I understand, you plan to upgrade the international corridor Kazan-Moscow, which should increase the transportation flows of Chinese export through Kazakhstan and Russia. Could you please explain how this project is progressing? I introduced the Institute of Economic Studies. My name is Sarah.
If that's okay. There's a question from a lady right behind you. No, there's a lady behind that had put her hand first, if you don't mind. Nope, she's Sarah, all yours.
Hello.
Oh, yeah, you're on.
Thank you. So my question is, you said that, don't you actually think that the rapid growth of connectivity will discourage the development of domestic production? Thank you.
Sorry, your question is that it will discourage the
development of domestic production.
Of domestic production. Got it. I got it. Okay. Thank you very much. One more. Come on. Yes.
I'm a pensioner. I'm a consultant in finance. My question is related to the railroad. When you build a very long railroad, how do you calculate your return on investment? How many trains do you need to have in order that it makes it viable from an economic point of view? And if I ask the question, it's just I have no answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That question, I will have a follow-up on that, which we'll take in a second round on the private sector. But let's first answer this set of questions. Who wants to tackle the Arctic question? Massimo, you're on.
I can say that, to be honest, we do not study too much the Arctic option. I think that it could be, but perhaps in a long terms, and in a certain way we should hope that it will be in a very, very long terms, I mean in many, many years. Otherwise, it means that we have very, very big problems in terms of climate change and so on. But it could be. But the point is that, you know, rail or ships is to connect. And more, as I said, the success point of Belt and Road Initiative is that you have multiple options. Arctic is an option for point to point. I don't think that the future of transportation is point to point because of the economies of scale reasons. So I'm a little bit skeptical, all a part of the climate change, argument.
Thank you. Alexei, if you could answer the question that came on the specific area, but also on local production. That was a very good question. I think the logic there is that if you create connectivity, then you will make certain goods which are locally produced perhaps less competitive, and therefore local production will lose out from connectivity. Would you agree with that as well? So these two elements of the question.
Okay, regarding the reduction of local production, I think that, well, I'm a railwayman and I'm responsible in our joint venture for the transit, which cannot go with just one of these three important parts of 15-20 gauge. And I think in these kind of things, we are not competitors, we are partners. And we can go better, and we can achieve a better results together. So, of course, there are some fields, for example, in a freight forwarding to import, export, and domestic routes, where we can compete, and we can also assume that this competition also will go on. I think that the common project, where we have a common target, is a very good way of how to stay more competitive and more efficient in the local production. So it's like in our basic corridor, transit corridor through Kazakhstan, Russia, and Belarus. We have, for example, Kazakhstan has a state-of-art border terminal in Khorgos, which is really one of the best I ever saw, whether it's Europe or United States. And it shows the perfect figures for the train operations, operations with a train. So the complete train, all in 40 minutes. Isn't it great? Belarus is the benchmark in the speeds. So the trains go faster on this, on their area. And we also, in Russia and Kazakhstan, we're trying to be as faster as we have the speeds from our Belarusian partner. So there are many things we can learn from each other, and we can make our local production more competitive and efficient. I don't know if I give you an answer on this question.
I'd like to combine the two questions about Arctic and say something complementary to Massimo. So when we have a transportation system, this is not the one point to the other. We need to use also the intermediary, let's say, stops. It's critical for the production that Lady has done as a question. Yes, Kazakhstan and every country in Central Asia or in Caucasus will take a lot of advantages out of their local production with the connectivity system because they have how to transport. Before it was much more difficult. Having all the interconnections, much more difficult, much more expensive. Trade facilitation process took much more time, and cross-border took days and days. just to cross the border, not with a train, with just a truck. Now this changed. And this changed because of all this understanding, common understanding of the countries involved, that we have to face less and less problems. 20 years before, believe me, in order to cross a border in Central Asia was unbelievable. You could see lines of 2,000 cars waiting for days and not moving. It was one problematic cargo. It was not moving 2,000 cars. Unbelievable. I have seen, because I was working, I was crossing each and every day several borders in this respect. So this interconnectivity, this connectivity will upgrade enormously local production of all the countries involved. And of course, increase the development of each and every country.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I know Alexei will need to leave us a few minutes early to make a flight. Did you want to take the question on the Russian Kazakhstan?
Я, если можно, отвечу по-русски.
If possible, I will answer in Russian. Thank you so much for the questions. But my response to these questions would not be voiced because I'm not involved in these projects. I deal with the separate transportation projects between Kazakhstan, Russia, and Belarus. I may only say as to throughput capacity in this route, we actually allow 1 million containers per day, and that's without very major infrastructures. And
Traffic. Можно на русском тоже, да?
Well, you know, I may say that the calculation of the net cost cannot be voiced within 1 minute. I may only say that container transportations at the route 1520 are regarded as most economically effective because they're very easy, very agile, and the passenger movement is the priority in the freight movement. And the more we have such trains, the more funds will be invested in such transportations. Спасибо.
Because there is a perception that both in the rail sector and in the port management sector, the state is crucial, and the private sector plays only a marginal role. Things have changed drastically in the last decades in terms of the role of the private sector, both in rail and ports. And it's a little bit linked to the question that was asked, what are the returns on investments on rail? What are the returns on investment on ports? Can I ask your thoughts about this, and particularly whether you think these are going to be sector that will attract substantial private financing in the future, or they're a sector that will continue to require subsidization, presence of the state, and so on? Massimo, do you want to kick us off, then Thomas, perhaps?
Yes. Good question. Again, if we look at what is happening in the Mediterranean and in Italy, we have very successful story. I think that the Tanger Med, for not talking about the Italian ports, is a very success story. It was not existing as a port in 10 years ago. Now is one of the most important transshipment ports. There is a free zone. Renault invested a lot in the automotive sector for a factory inside the free zone. So a sort of combination between ports, logistics, infrastructures, and private investment. In Italy, we are experiencing the experience, sorry for using the same terms, of free zones, special economic zones, and as I said, which are in Italian ports, especially in South Italian ports, because of the new centrality, as we have seen before, the connectivity and the performance index in terms of connectivity and logistics performance index are improving, and new investments are coming from abroad. Chinese investment in the Genoa port, in Trieste port, in Taranto port, Maersk, the Danish shipping company in Naples. Turkish players are investing in Taranto. And as I said, as a bank, we put a credit line, a special devoted to. So, but the point I want to stress, if I may, and if I come back to my slides, it can be useful just to show one slide. I think, I don't know if there is again, okay, thank you very much. And if you can put again my slides, I would like to show you just two more slides. If it's possible, please. Thank you. I hope it will come. Otherwise, I can say that the fact of having experienced a new centrality in the Mediterranean, I come immediately. Yeah? Okay. Okay. So the role that we can play as a private sector to help this transformation. These 2 points are very important. The first one, what we experience, the new economic and geopolitical centrality I talk about is drawing in the Mediterranean, and I think will draw here improvement in connectivity. But to attract private investors and new businesses opportunity, we need 2 key elements. The first one is to continue to invest in infrastructures, and this is the government job. I don't want to read, but you can read. I put some numbers on the EU investment expected for trans-European networks for transport, and what is expected, at least Asia will invest to continue to grow. But the point is to foster the strategic role of logistics centers, ports, land ports, industrial parks, incubators, relation between universities and research centers, industry and logistics centers, and then free zones. The point is that if you only use fiscal attraction, fiscal advantages, custom advantages is not, I mean, it can be the start of the process, but is not enough. What you need is what we call logistics and connectivity 5.0. We call, I mean, in Italy, because we are moving toward this model. That means, first point, trade. Of course, if you are a port, if you are a land port, you want to increase import-export, you want to host import-export-oriented activities, you have to be open to trade, is the first step. The second step is intermodality. Then, after having your goods in your port, you need to easily reach a vast land. So, intermodality. And this also touched the point of the regional network. The success we experience in the Mediterranean of the effect of Belt and Road is also due to the fact that we have a regional network in the Mediterranean. And this is something that I can suggest strongly to this part of the world, to develop also regional network of transportation. Intercontinental, which is Belt and Road Initiative, is important, but you also need to develop the regional network in order to have a positive effect. Then the third point is training, academy, relation with universities. Again, according to the best experience we have in the world. In the Hamburg port, you have the Transport University, which is inside the port, not close, inside the port. So strong relation with. Industry, I mean, not only trade, also hosting manufacturing activity. And finally, what is a special economic zone, free zone, you can call it whatever you want, fiscal advantages, but this is, in a certain way, at the end. If you think that to succeed a logistic area, you only need fiscal advantages, I think you are in the wrong way.
Very good. Thomas.
I'd like to say exactly what Massimo explained, that yes, there is a space for the private sector to all these multimodal transportation systems. We in Greece, we have seen, following the privatization of Piraeus Port, the increase by Costco, the increase of the quantities of containers that arrived, the new jobs, the new developments, the new technologies that were used. Following that, we had the privatization of Thessaloniki port. And now, I'm running personally, privatization of 10 ports in Greece simultaneously, slots, one after the other. But finally, also the perception of the people that considered all the ports like holy cows we don't touch, suddenly they realized this is something we have to work with. From one part is the state, because, okay, they have done the infrastructure, this infrastructure for years and years and spent a lot of money, is their tax money, but now it's time to put the new technologies, the new quantities, the new flows. So let's bring PPP, private-public partnerships, and create the added value for all the system, society and economy. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask Eugene to follow up on that, but before we do that, we are going to lose Alexei in a couple of minutes. So last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I can support the previous speakers, and in practice, besides we're the state-owned company with 3 states in our capital, but we're assets-light company. We're from assets-light segment, so 50% of our assets we use from private sector, and we want to develop this sector. So I think there are a lot of space for private sector in our particular bridge, Eurasian Railway Bridge.
Right, that's great. Eugene, if we could have Eugene's slides up, they're coming on, Eugene. Thank you, Alexei.
Thank you. Sorry if I may. I just add to add one point, right, about the complementary of the rail and the shipping lines, right? Here we have a possibility of creating corridors, whether it's fertilizer corridor or grain corridor, right? And here we can see that's actually a unique proposition. Connect a corridor from Kazakhstan, right? You call it the grain, sorry, hold on a minute. Yeah, you call it the grain corridor, you can see here, which is from the wheat fields to have alternative corridor, which is going actually from the north. So when you pass this through to Baku, right, that means that you may have an alternative route. This creates security for the region. I think the Kazakhstan government is looking very actively into this route. So complementary-wise, you need a good rail system connecting to Porty, and then from Porty, the maritime ship will take it to the world markets. So this is just one point to add. And you asked me to add on to the other part, the last part, right? Okay, this is actually to sum up, actually what are the critical success factors along the One Belt, One Route, which everybody is talking about, which my esteemed colleagues has already been saying about all the framework. So if you break it down into 3 big portions, right? You're talking about efficiency of clearance process and the regulatory framework. You need this in place, right? Improve border facilities. Right? There have been enhanced border facilities now to facilitate the exchange, right? Improve security, adoption of suitable regulations for e-commerce. That's very important. And actually the other thing is also the quality of logistics services, right? I mean, big companies to come in here, big logistics companies to set up integrated supply value chains, right? To add on to the value-added manufacturing, which, sorry. Okay, which to add on to the value-added manufacturing, which the free trade zones can play a part in to attract investors into this region, right? The last point is which I get my slides on. The last point is the transport-related subjects. Earlier on, someone said there was 1,000 kilometers, right, of daily rail transport, right? And that is actually fantastic. If in this region we can achieve that, then we hit a benchmark where you can say rail becomes a viable alternative to connect hubs, right? And also we need to have a modernization strategy. All the countries on the Belt and Road to be synchronized in upgrading its facilities so that we can have modern roads, modern rails connecting to the ports, and to the ports connecting back to the rails. Actually, Kazakhstan has already taken the lead in this. If you talk about the middle corridor, they have actually facilitated, right, already 2 vessels a week calling Baku from Kazakhstan, and it started by the Kazakh Railways, which forms a complete link for containers to travel from Kazakh, whether the origin is from China or from cargoes, all the way to Baku. We change the intermodal, go back to rails, all the way to Turkey, and even to the world markets or even to Europe. So this is just the start. It's the beginning. But I'm sure there'll be increase of it as more of these regulations, more of this framework come in place to facilitate the exchange of goods.
Thank you. That's a very good summary for us. The point you made earlier as well, I think, is the prompt for the next year's panel, which is the links between the solutions and the trends we are seeing and the role of the private sector in driving them and issues of security. Food security, but land security, defense security, many of the assets we're talking about are strategic assets from a defense perspective. But we can't open that now, otherwise we'll have a full new panel. We have just 3 minutes before we close, and I would like to give the opportunity for one more question. If we have a burning question from the audience, put your hand up and we'll give you the microphone for a last thought of the day. Anybody? Okay, there we go. Thank you, Max. That's brilliant.
I have a question mostly to Eugen and to Yerlan. During last year's summit of Caspian heads of states, there was one initiative, it was just only initiative, building so-called Eurasia Canal, connecting Caspian Sea with the Black Sea through Azov Sea, if I'm not wrong. From your view, is it may happen in future, in nearest future, or this will be initiative? Because it was firstly pronounced at the beginning of 20th century, it was this initiative, and now it was few times in 20th century, but now it's another proposal. And after the signing of the Caspian document, is it may happen or not?
I think if it's going to happen, there must be, first of all, a value proposition for this, right? I think in the Belarus region, you're talking about the Black Sea, right? You're talking about Belarus, this is called actually the Viking route, right? There's already some test shipments going on. It's viable. But we need to think about the demand for this route or even the supply of goods for these routes. At the end of the day, where will be the market serving? You're talking about the Black Sea region, then you're talking about Eastern Europe, you're talking about China, right? I think that when in Belarus you're talking about this, then you have the Great Stone Industrial Park. When the park becomes viable and more investors come in, and there'll be a source of goods to facilitate this route to be viable back to China, right? China as a huge market when you're talking about the middle income coming up with their consumer spending power. This trend, I see it will be across the whole One Belt and One Route. When you're talking about value-added manufacturing to come in, then you're talking about free zones being set up, industrial hubs being set up. It's no more intermodal facility anymore. It becomes a manufacturing, come intermodal, come a distribution center, right? And in Azerbaijan, in Baku, we aim to be one of these hubs. In Kazakhstan, you have the same hub. You have the same ambition. In Belarus, you have the same ambition. In China, it fits into their grand strategy because things are getting more expensive. Labor is getting more expensive. And you're going away from this, in this region, it might surprise you to say that Azerbaijan labor is competitive. It is. Belarus is also competitive. It is. So what are the things that can attract industries to these centers to feed the bigger market for middle income consumers in China? And that's where the regional markets idea will come in. And that's where international logistics players will have to come in to fill this gap. So we are talking not about 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. We're talking about 5 years, 10 years, 15 years expansion, right, of this one belt, one road. So the seeds now are being planted. I can see from a perspective here, I've been in Azerbaijan 4 years, I came from Singapore, I can see things sometimes are not so coordinated in these areas. But I see a search, I see things moving in the same direction to achieve this. So the Viking route is one big route, bigger even than the middle corridor, where now it flows to Poti and then it goes up. It goes all the way to the Black Sea. So we have to wait and see what happens to see the kind of hubs being set up along this route to facilitate the demand and supply for this exchange of goods.
Thank you very much. Yerlan?
Спасибо большое за вопрос. Как вы знаете, Казахстан.
Thank you very much for the question. As you know, Kazakhstan, if we judge by constructing new roads, is a champion in the world. As for the document, that initiative which was signed off by the heads of the Caspian Sea states, I think that this will happen. Very recently, on the level of the Interdepartmental Council of Eurasian Union, the document on marine transportation was signed, which simplifies the transit of our vessels through Volga and Don rivers. So through these channels, we can go to the sea directly.
We are out of time. I promised you the most exciting panel of the forum. I'm not sure we delivered that, but I certainly learned an awful lot from our speakers. So please join me in thanking them for coming all the way here.